Well, Christmas 1824. Why are we thinking about that this morning? Well, one is it's because it's 200 years ago. And it takes us right back to the early days of the Church Missionary Society mission to New Zealand Maori. And it's an encouraging story. So to hear more about it, I think, is encouraging for our faith today and what God can do today. It's one of the few accounts of Christmas that we have from this early period, actually. And we only have it because Marianne Williams, like a number of women of her day of a certain generation, thinking of Jane Austen and others, she was a literary person and she wrote and kept a journal. Many of the missionary wives didn't do that. And quite understandably, because they were exhausted running the households, running the mission station, teaching and all sorts of other things, and it wasn't part of their culture to be writing. But Marianne Williams kept a journal. And so whereas the missionaries had to write an official journal for the CMS, which they made sure that they were very careful what information they were passing back to England and what they kept, mainly because they were so thirsty for news in England that they would leap on, if they mentioned somebody's name, they would leap on that as a wonderful story of conversion. And the missionaries were very careful that they didn't want to mention people by name or events that might skew the picture. So Henry Williams is very cautious in what he writes. And so you get the note that there was Christmas Day and that they kept and observed Christmas, but no details. Whereas Marianne Williams is writing for herself and for family, and so she's full of details. She mentions people's names. She talks about the things from her perspective that were important. Actually, are things that we are very interested in today. And later on, she wasn't keeping her journal the same way, or we don't have access to that. And so this is one of the few accounts of what Christmas Day was like in that early mission period. And so that's why it gives us a good chance 200 years ago today to look at Christmas 1824. It's a story of the way in which the mission was founded in friendship and hospitality. And so often we have this idea of, in our general society at least, of the missionaries coming out and indoctrinating Maori or somehow brainwashing them or impressing them with their knowledge and their technology, that Maori somehow were duped into believing. But actually, they believed the message they brought, but it was founded on the friendship that they had established with the missionaries, a friendship of trust, and the hospitality that they experienced at the mission station, which spoke of the hospitality that God was extending, not just to the white man, but also to Maori as well. We also see in the story the cost of missionary service, and particularly in these early days, how far away the missionaries were from the safety of home and family, and how fragile their very existence in New Zealand was. And although it might not have been, in retrospect, a case that Maori were going to directly threaten their lives, they certainly made them feel like they were going to do so if they didn't conform to how they wanted them to act. Maori had a way of terrifying them, and they didn't know what to expect. But just simply living in that time, away from the amenities of home, meant that life was fragile. And we see some of the homesickness and the cost of missionary service. And of course we have in our midst people who have done that and who have lived a long way from family and home and know something of the cost. And you will identify with the story of what Christmas was like for Marianne Williams, I'm sure. And I'd love to hear your comments afterwards. Well, that was a previous picture was of Paihia today, a beach resort, a strip of motels where you can go and stay. This is a sketch from 1827 of Paihia from a nearby hill, and they were just clinging to. When you hear about mission farms, you know the topography wasn't great for their missionary endeavours. That's why they were, at particularly the Waimate station, able to go further inland and have land more suitable for agriculture. But in 1824, there were perhaps 24 people living on the station, 13 Europeans and 13 Maori. The 13 Maori, most of those were boys and girls who had been loaned to the mission, whether they'd been slaves or they were sons and daughters they wanted to have educated at the mission. In a few years' time, in 6 years' time, 1830, Henry Williams estimates that there was 200 living at Paihia, 60 Europeans, missionaries and their children, and 140 Maori. So even at this small stage, 50% of the community at Paihia were Maori. There were two missionary families. There was Henry and Marianne Williams, and their 4 children at that stage, and William and Sarah Fairburn, and they had 3 young children themselves. There was also William Pucky Sr. and his son, who was also called William Pucky, who were helping to build the Herald. So on this is 1827, so it's after the launch of the Herald, but on the beach was being built a boat, which the missionaries, when they launched it in January 1826, they sailed to Sydney, and that shows the confidence in how, if I built a boat, I'd be doing a lot of experimentation. I'd be flying it to the moon first before sailing to New South Wales. But so Marianne Williams, she was 31 years old. They had been in New Zealand just a little over 1 year. They arrived in August 1823. This is now Christmas 1824. She's 31. Henry was 42. And they had 4 children under 6 years. And it turns out that Marianne was probably 10 weeks pregnant at this stage, because she goes on to have her 5th child in July the following year. Their youngest child, Henry, was 13 months. So I say that, so she still was writing in her diary, a journal, about sleepless nights. And do you still have those, River? I found that I never woke for crying babies. I'd say to Sue, you wake me whenever you need, just wake me. But I never woke for. But if a telephone went, I was bolt upright. So I don't know. So Christmas Day was a Saturday, and Marianne describes that the days of that week since Wednesday. I think they had some rain on Tuesday, but since the Wednesday, very hot. Very hot. She's exhausted from the heat. This is a sketch, actually quite later, 1852, of Russell, or Kororareka, across the bay. Christmas Eve, on the Friday, Marianne and Henry had the joyful sight of seeing 2 boats coming into the bay and anchoring here across at Russell. Joyful because the prospect of letters and connection with the outside world. And in fact, it turns out that one of the boats had come directly from England. And so the prospect not only of letters from family, but also presents, Christmas presents, all those things. But their joy was tempered a little because Marianne Williams could see that the mast of one of the ships, the Mary, the flag on the mast was at half-mast. And Henry knew that was either because of the death of the owner or the death of the captain. Well, it turned out that Captain Rennick, who was a young and respected captain who was known to the missionaries, was drowned off the coast of Tasmania. And so 15 days beforehand, and they'd come in there. And the news was sobering to all the other ships anchored in the bay, as well as to the missionaries. So it turned out that Captain Rennick had was it was on his way out from England. He was 4 months from England, and he was coming around the coast of Tasmania when he spoke to a ship. That means he passed a ship and they communicated with one another, and the ship he was passing was going back directly to England, and so he wanted to put letters on board to go back to England. And the way that you did that was you got into a boat and you rowed across and you delivered them in person. And it just happened to be midnight, but you can't be saying, well, can you hang around till morning? No, Captain Rennick, he launched the boat. This is part of the seafaring of the day. He launched the boat, he and the 6 crew, to row across. And as they were lowering the boat, a mishap happened. They were tipped into the sea. And only the 2 that managed to stay with the boat, the little rowing boat, survived. So Captain Rennick and 2 of the crew, and 5 of the crew were drowned. And if I got that right, Captain Rennick and 4 of the crew were drowned. Henry Williams notes in his journal, they were launched into eternity. And it reminds, because this is how the missionaries were thinking, actually, the boundary between life and having body and soul together and facing death can happen very quickly and very suddenly. And suddenly, in this world, you're suddenly facing your Maker in the world to come. Launched into eternity. As it reminded not only the sailors of the dangers of seafaring, and of course Henry Williams knew that, but also the missionaries themselves, that actually, if it wasn't for God's sustaining power, how could they possibly survive where they were? They depended on God in all things. Well, Christmas Day. This is a watercolour that Henry Williams did himself. He was a sketch. He did sketches and paintings. 1830 is where they're dating this one too, but my feeling is it's a little later than that. But this is of their house, their new built house, and which, if that's the case, it wouldn't be too many years old, and so the tree plantings. So anyway, that's what the National Library say. They say it's around 1830, but I would have thought that's around 1840. But anyway, that's just my hunch. But Christmas Day, Marianne Williams had to get up early because she had to get the fires going. She had to put on the big kettles and other things because she was going to be hosting a whole group for Christmas lunch. And she had to get it all up and running with the help of Maori who are helping her, her Maori helpers, all up and running so it could be cleared away in time for Christmas Day services. And because Christmas Day was a Sabbath day, and in the way that the missionaries said, I noticed today that many churches, Christmas Day, it's an optional day as to whether you have a church service, and optional day in the sense that the whole church will close down. And it's not because small churches are, you can think, well, small churches, people are away, there's very few. It makes sense to say, well, maybe we can join in with others, and which I think is perfectly fine. But they're big churches who have endless resources, but no, we're going to let our church people go off and have time with their family. For them, it's not a Sabbath. For the missionaries, it was. It meant, as we'll see, that they didn't get their letters from home or their presents from home because Saturday was a Sabbath, as was Sunday. And so it wasn't until Monday that any communication with the ships could take place. Well, a special Sabbath like Good Friday was as well. And at the service, 4 ship's captains and their crews came for the service. Perhaps they too were sobered by the sudden death of such a capable captain as Captain Rennick. And Maori gathered round too. They weren't there for the service, They were there for the food. And they grew increasingly impatient with the length of the service and the prayers. Marianne Williams makes the comment, the only chief who would perhaps have felt some spiritual interest in the day, our interesting friend at Waitangi, is lame and never visits the settlement. So she's speaking of Christian Rangi, of course, who they would visit. And, he has, by this stage, at Christmas Day, he's thrown off the tapu. He's done the experiment with the kumara, planting some kumara with the karakia and some without. And he's now thrown all the traditional rituals that were associated with him being as a chief. He's thrown them away. But because he was lame, probably as the result of tuberculosis, which he was suffering from, Pott's disease they call it, he was lame. Everyone else had gathered, but the one person who would have expressed an interest in what was happening was not there. The others had come for the food, for the hospitality. At this stage, they were not interested in the service itself. Well, when the service had finished, all things were ready, and they invited 30 Maori, individually, personally invited, to come and sit at benches, a table and benches made out of rough sawn planks of timber, which were in ready supply because they were building a boat down on the beach. So they would have just grabbed some of the timbers used that had been cut for the ship, and they put those up, and there was a spoon, a knife, and a plate for 30. 30 were invited. Marianne Williams says the troublesome Maori were deliberately excluded. They were pleased that they took their medicine well, because they could have caused a trouble, jumped the fence and all sorts of things. But they contented themselves with looking through. They've got these fence enclosures, they're just sticks stuck together, and so you could look through and see what was happening. She says troublesome Maori, i.e. Maori who the month before had terrified them to an inch of their life. As I say, they probably weren't having their life in danger, but they weren't to know that. As Henry goes out of the house to confront these Maori, and then the reports come back, Henry's been shot, and it's just absolute chaos, and the family are traumatised, and makes quite sense. The ones who had reconciled with them, they were invited in. In fact, there was one there who he and his wife were forgiven and invited in, but the others were kept outside. Henry gave a blessing on the food in English. He has yet really to come to terms with the language. But William Fairburn, who had been there, I think since, if I remember rightly, 1819, he explained what the blessing was to Maori. And then the food was served. And Marianne describes the food. So it was boiled beef soup with plenty of peas and potatoes, and followed by plum pudding and treacle cake. So that sounds like a traditional English lunch. Yeah, so nothing like a beef broth with peas and potatoes in it. Plum pudding, that's why she had to get the big cauldron of hot water going so she could boil the plum puddings, and treacle cake. I'm not sure what treacle cake is, but it sounds to me like sticky date pudding. So I'm going to be happy with that. So one of the Maori hosts, the one who was their patron really, Te Koki, he was down in the Kawa and wasn't actually able to be there. So Marianne Williams makes the comment that she saved a Benjamin's mess for him. Do you know what a Benjamin's mess is? So that's from the story in Genesis of Joseph and his brothers when they come to Pharaoh, and he orders that Benjamin given 5 times the portion as others. So she saved a generous portion for Takoki, who wasn't able to be there. He was their patron who was looking after them. And the meal ended with a tumbler of colonial wine mixed with water and sugar to make it sweet. And that's a good way to wash down the meal. Everyone left by 3 p.m. So the evening service was held at the Fairburns house, but Marianne stayed home and rested. Little wonder. And this is what she wrote in her journal. And just an experiment to see. Just tell me afterwards whether that font's too small or too large. No, not too large, but too small, or the background, because I'll have to try and improve this over time. This is my first guess. So Marianne Williams wrote in her journal, "This is a day of great excitement in a foreign land on which England and dear family circles wind round the heart. It is the 3rd I have seen since I left England. May we think more earnestly of the glorious family in our Father's house, and more earnestly pray to bring the New Zealanders there." You know, I just intrigued. She just makes that little comment, but you can see the pathos there. She's thinking back to England and the family and what they're doing, and that tug of, why aren't I there? What am I doing here? But then realising God's purpose in bringing them there, for that not only for themselves, that there's a home they're going to, the Father's house, but that they're there so that actually their Maori friends might join them there as well. And there is a sense in which, we're always leaving behind the places we called home and our family and friends. And, I'm convinced that our true home is not where we happen to be from. It's where we're going. And it doesn't matter whether you feel disconnected from family and friends this Christmas. It's more important to know that you're fulfilling God's purpose for your life for being where you are. And for Marianne Williams, on the far edges of the known universe, she knew God's purpose for her family back in England, to pray for them and for them to pray and to look. Only after 10 years of the mission, only one lame chief showed any interest. Well, Christian Rangi became a Christian in August next year. He was baptised in the September, although he died the day after his baptism. It wasn't really for another 6 years of earnestly praying that the first embers of the Maori conversion started to be fanned into flame. And what a wonderful work it was. This is the day of endurance, of constancy, of prayer, of looking to God, knowing that He is bringing about His purposes in their life. And I think that's an encouragement to us wherever we are too. This is where God has placed me. And I'm thankful for the things that have been, but I'm more thankful for where I'm heading. Well, as I said, the next day was Sunday, so that was a Sabbath. So it wasn't till Monday, the day after the Boxing Day sales, that that Henry Williams was able to get into a boat and to sail across the bay and get the crates and the letters that had been sent. And when Henry returned from the Mary, Marianne Williams wrote these words: "The dear children were all anxiety to see the things unpacked. The various little presents from Hampstead and Southall," is that how you say it? Southall? Southwell? Southall? "Affected us all. The native girls and boys gathered round, and Henry, as he took parcel after parcel out, appeared like some conjurer. So here you got the wooden crates, and he's getting it down into them and pulling these things out. So Hampstead, that's where Marianne Williams' sister, married to Edward Marsh, lived. And I haven't quite worked out the Southall connection, but presume it's where some family were living. And this is her reaction. As Henry pulled these things out, everything fresh from England looked so bright and beautiful, so clean and neat in this wilderness, and reminds us so peculiarly of the land of our fathers, that the sensations are not to be described. We had only one disappointment. 3 letters from Edward were all that could be found. So Edward Marsh was her brother-in-law and Henry Williams's cousin, and it was Edward Marsh that first encouraged them to become missionaries. In fact, Henry had decided to become a missionary before he married Marianne, so she married him knowing that she was going to go to the most dangerous mission that the CMS had at the time, which was to New Zealand. And she knew that when she had left, she was not returning, essentially. Well, unlikely to return, and in fact, she never did. And yet the connections back home were so important. And Henry, when he applied to the CMS as a married man, he said, I don't go with a wife, I go with a mission partner. I go with a partner in the mission. And that's how actually the missionary wives were. They weren't counted by the CMS because of the day as missionaries, but they all had a full part in the work of the mission. And certainly Marianne did as well. Only 3 letters from Edward. She was hoping for so much more. It reminds us that if we have people who are disconnected from us, particularly those who are missionaries in isolated places, we should write them a letter at Christmas time. I don't know whether receiving, those you return missionaries, receiving letters at Christmas time, precious. Yeah, there are people today that might be worth writing a letter for to encourage them. Well, as I said, Christian Rangi's baptism was the following year in September. The Maori conversion began in a small way in 1830, but a small but distinct way, a dramatic way, on the 24th of February 1830, which is Ash Wednesday, or was then, and over the course of 20 years, some 90 to 95% of Maori converted to Christianity. It's the most amazing story that has taken the ingenuity of the last 60 years for secular historians to try to explain it away, and I don't think they have done so in any adequate way at all. And so that's a wonderful story. And here we see some of the determination, the hospitality that was extended to 30 Maori there, who would eventually all become Christians, or most of them would, and join them in her father's house on that great day.